The following is a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Welcome, brothers, to a Brother Ask and Building Better Builders Uncommon Masonic Education video presentation on Zoom here today. We are doing a very interesting presentation, but before we get started, let me give you a little bit background. These presentations have been given nationwide since 2009. This represents about maybe a 20-minute presentation of a 6-hour workshop that I do nationwide. And the information that is being conveyed today is hopefully going to provide light to mentors, trainers, coaches, and instructors so that they can go ahead and assist the next generation of Masons toward betterment. Little background story as to why this presentation actually came about. Somebody had asked me a while back how many staircases there were in the Blue Lodge experience. And immediately I said, well, how many do you know about? And he said, well, there's the Fellowcraft staircase. And I said, yes, there's at least one more. And he started scratching his head, and we got into a conversation. And as that conversation unfolded, we came to find that there were actually 3 Blue Lodge staircases either mentioned or alluded to within the Blue Lodge experience. Now, you might be listening to this and saying, hey, wait a second, Coach, I only know of one. And you're saying there's 2 more staircases? How could that be? And now's the rest of the story. We start out with recognizing immediately that there is a staircase mentioned in the staircase lecture of the Fellowcraft degree, which is the middle degree between the entered apprentice degree and the Master Mason degree. And if you recall, there are 15 steps. This is the first staircase that is usually recognized, but it is the last one that's actually introduced to candidates as they are going through the degree. If you recall, there are 3, 5, and 7 flights of stairs. The initial 3 steps, if you are paying attention, they talk about it representing the junior warden, senior warden, and worshipful master. They also represent the entered apprentice, Fellowcraft, and Master Mason degree. And last but not least, if you pay attention in the 3rd degree, you'll notice that they also give 3 steps that represent youth, adulthood, and age. These represent the 3 principal officers, the 3 degrees, and of course the 3 stages of life. Now, if you go up to the next flight of stairs, you are introduced to the 5 senses and 5 pillars, respectively: hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, and smelling, of which hearing, seeing, and touching are focused upon to transmit information and light to brothers through the Blue Lodge experience. You'll also notice that you have 5 pillars, which is the Tuscan, Ionic, Doric, Corinthian, and Composite, of which the 3 Greek pillars are those pillars that we focus on in the Blue Lodge experience. However, what they really represent are the tools that you use for the next 7 steps, and of course the map of progression as you work through the Blue Lodge experience. Now, you might say, John, what do you mean map? That's a good question to ask. If you represent the pillars as circles here, as the Tuscan, Ionic, Doric, Corinthian, and Composite, if you reconfigure these, by the way, before I reconfigure them, the 3 in the center are Greek and the 2 flanking are Roman. Now, if you reconfigure them so that you form them in this direction, you'll notice that the flow of progression is from entering as a Tuscan, the simplest and most plainest of all pillars. You're basically in a rough state. And if you actually do the work and focus on building within yourself such that the Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian are brought into your life through the work that you do, such that all are present and all are in agreement. Now, I just gave you some really interesting codes there. The Ionic represents the worshipful master. The Doric represents the senior warden, and the Corinthian represents the junior warden. So we have wisdom, strength, and beauty, and you're supposed to do the work within the Blue Lodge experience, such that wisdom, strength, and beauty are all present within your life, and that all are in agreement, such that the result is the composite or the masterful pillar that you are to represent if you do the work as you go through the degrees. Using that roadmap, you would study the 7 liberal arts and sciences. They are astronomy, music, geometry, arithmetic, rhetoric, logic, and grammar. I did that purposely backwards. And they represent the trivium and quadrivium portion of your studies. So if you look at the 15 steps in all, you have the levels of achievement within the Blue Lodge experience, the tools and the map that you're supposed to follow, along with the course of study to raise your mind from chaos to order, or to bring order to the chaos of your mind. We're going to use that same type of pattern, that paradigm, in the entered apprentice staircase. There are 15 steps in all, and this is the second staircase that is actually mentioned within the Blue Lodge experience during the entered apprentice degree, actually during the lecture itself. It is the second recognized one, and it's the second introduced one. Now you're probably saying, how did you come about with that, Coach? And that's a good question to ask, because you probably heard or had mentioned during your Blue Lodge experience during the first degree about Jacob's ladder. But Jacob's ladder is not actually a ladder. It is a sulam. It is Hebrew for a gradiated incline, aka staircase. Jacob's ladder is actually a staircase, and that is mentioned in the entered apprentice lecture in most jurisdictions. If you take a look at the 3 principal rungs or steps that are mentioned in most jurisdictions' lectures about the Jacob's ladder, you'll recognize that the 3 principal rungs are the theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity, aka agape for charity, or unconditional love. But these are not the only rungs that are mentioned in lectures. In fact, we have a modern day version where you've truncated the ladder down to 3 rungs or 3 steps. In previous renderings of the staircase lecture for the Jacob's ladder, there are a multitude of other steps that were mentioned. In this particular case, cardinal virtues were also mentioned. They constitute fortitude, temperance, prudence, and justice. And if you take these rungs and add them to the last remaining steps of Jacob's staircase, you have 3 and 4, with the cardinal virtues leading up to the theological virtues. And these are the last 7 steps of Jacob's staircase. But the 5 additional steps that are preceding these 7 steps are the 5 human domains. They constitute the spiritual, temporal, mental, emotional, and physical steps that you must engage in order for you to build back to those virtues. Now, I'll give you a little idea as to where I'm going with this. Those virtues literally are manly strength. And another word for manly strength is Boaz in Hebrew. And in order for you to build Boaz, build the virtues within your life, you have to make sure that the 5 human domains that you're building virtues in are covered. You want to make sure that you practice virtue physically, emotionally, mentally, temporally, and also spiritually. You also have 3 steps preceding this. The very first step is personal knowledge. The second is divestment, and the third has to do with integrity and commitment. These are goals. These are what you are shooting for by working those 5 domains to bring strength to them. And ironically, if you go back to Apollo's temple in Delphi, he had about 150 aphorisms literally etched into the walls of the temple. And the very first three are know thyself, nothing too much, and make a pledge, and mischief is nigh. Now, if you want to know what these three mean, go back to this. Know thyself. This is all about personal knowledge. And this was the very first aphorism that was etched into the temple of Delphi, Apollo's temple, where they basically say you better know yourself before you enter in this and ask the oracle for what it is that you need to expect in life. The second is divestment. And one of the first things that we're told as an entered apprentice coming out the chute after the obligation is we are supposed to divest ourselves of the vices and superfluities of hearts and consciousnesses. The idea is that you want to make sure that you're not burdened with anything that is excessive or excessively damaging. And last but not least, integrity and commitment. Let me go back to those aphorisms. Know thyself, nothing too much, that has to do with divestment, and make a pledge, and mischief is nigh, which basically says that you don't want to give anybody a check that they can't cash. You want to make sure that your word is your bond, and anything that comes out of your mouth and anything that you commit to, you can follow through on. And these are the three specific goals of the entered apprentice. You want to make sure that you know yourself, that you're not burdened, that you build your strength, and you build it on a foundation of integrity and commitment. And of course, within the domains that an entered apprentice has to build his strength in. Now we're going to get to the master's steps, which is pretty interesting because they are hidden in plain sight, as a lot of things are within Freemasonry. There are 15 steps in total. And when you recognize where they come from, I hope you don't have a Homer Simpson moment saying, "Do." Here it goes. They're referred to, these 15 steps are referred to as Songs of Ascent. And Songs of Ascent is a title given to 15 Psalms, Psalms 120 through 134 in the Christian text and 119 through 133 in the Jewish text. They are also variously called and referred to as gradual psalms within the Roman Catholic Church, songs of degrees, songs of steps, songs of going up to worship, and the one that I like most, pilgrim songs. Now, why do I like this the best? Because the word pilgrim literally means spiritual traveler on a spiritual journey. And all these steps are referred to in various phrases and terminologies. They all have to do with steps and degrees, which as a Mason, well, steps and degrees are what we're all about. The Songs of Ascent, they represent a song for each of the 15 steps ascending to King Solomon's temple. Before you get to the actual ground floor, you have 15 steps to get there. And you will most likely recognize the 14th step in the Psalms, Psalm 133, as "Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity." This is the 14th of 15 steps. So for those of you who have never looked up the word psalm, psalm is a sacred song or hymn. In a particular, it is any of those contained in the biblical book of Psalms and are used in Christian and Jewish worship. If you were to take the 15 songs and try to boil them down, boil their essence down, the first one has to do with a plea for relief from bitter foes. This particular psalm has to do with recognizing that you are surrounded by people who have disharmony and animosity and a lack of peace in their hearts, and you are literally quartered with these individuals. And what you do is, in this song, you plead for relief, that you want to be surrounded by people who are peaceful in mind and in consciousness and in heart. As you progress through them, you ask for help, that God will provide you help if you seek him. You will be provided joy in traveling to the house of the Lord. And I can go through each and every one of these. Eventually you get down to step 14, where you find out that you're blessed with unity, and it is that you are now surrounded by people of God. And when you finally get to the level of King Solomon's temple, you're praising the Lord because you are within his house. If you were to take each and every one of these and try to group them into that 3, 5, and 7, you wind up finding out that the first 3 steps is pointing you on a quest. You're seeking peace. You want God's protection, so you start traveling to God's house. The next 5 steps in the next flight of stairs is realizing what it is that is offered to you, that you are now praying for relief. You recognize God as security and strength, and that you must return to God, and it is God that builds through you. And last but not least, the next 7 is building. And in order to build, you have to follow God's teachings. You have to pray for victory over your enemies. Anything that is holding you back, anything that is bringing you non-peace, you must have victory over. You have a hope for redemption. You commit to the path of humility, and you commit to being God's servant in making sure that God's covenant is honored in all that you do. You realize very quickly that you are surrounded by brethren, which is exactly what you hear as you circumambulate during your entered apprentice degree. You hear, behold, how good and pleasant. And last but not least, when you reach that 15th step, what you have built is realized, and you praise the Lord for what it is that you have been blessed with. And there's 15 steps in all. And if you are somebody who is on a spiritual journey, I do encourage you to investigate these 15 steps. Read through the Psalms, explore the words that they use within the Psalms, and try to see how it applies to your own spiritual journey. And maybe you'll gain some great insight into what's next for you. So this has been a presentation on what it is that you say to a candidate when they ask you about the staircases and the Blue Lodge experience. What I'll add to this is that the first staircase in the entered apprentice degree that you have to ascend is that of the heart. In doing so, you bring order to the chaos of the heart. In the fellowcraft degree, you bring order to the chaos of your mind, your intellect, your thinking. And last but not least, by traveling up that staircase, the Master Mason one referred to in Psalms, you bring order to the chaos of your spirit. For those of you who differentiate soul from spirit, I would encourage you to look upon this, the first 2 staircases, the heart and mind, as bringing about order to the chaos of your soul and a cultivation of your soul, such that when you bring order to the chaos of your soul, you can then bring order to the chaos of your spirit by doing your Master Mason work. We are going to transition very shortly into a conversation and a discussion as to what it is that you got out of this talk, what you might be considering doing differently into the future, and last but not least, what do you think you're going to be doing with this to positively impact others and yourself into the future? You will go ahead and entertain some questions and thoughts after this. Let me go ahead and close out the presentation. I thank you. This has been a Brother Asks and a Building Better Builders Uncommon Masonic Education presentation with your coach host, John S. Nagy. You can find me on Facebook and at coach.net. And I hope that you've enjoyed the presentation.
You've been watching a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.